Epic prank, they said. Just a toy, they said. Now I'm stuck in a cell while the whole world laughs at me through their screens. How did a harmless joke turn into a life sentence and a trending hashtag? Let's break it down. The air at the palace square was thick with the kind of energy only tourists bring. Restless, eager, and constantly snapping pictures like they were on a mission to document every inch of the place. You had families arguing over the best camera angles, kids hyped up on sugar running circles around their parents, and the occasional street performer trying to make a quick buck. Amidst this carnival of chaos, the royal guard stood like ancient statues, not even blinking as camera flashes exploded around them. Now, in any other scenario, these guards were just background decoration for tourists like Thomas Buckley. But today, Thomas had other plans. 30 years old, 6 feet of reckless ambition, and a ginger beard that made him look like an extra from a medieval battle scene. Oh, and did I mention he was holding what looked disturbingly like a real rifle? Yeah, just your average day in the life of a thrill-seeking American abroad. Man, these guys are unreal. They don't even twitch. Thomas chuckled, nudging his friend Danny, who stood next to him with an expression halfway between exhaustion and panic. Danny had long since given up trying to control his friend's impulsive streak, but even he knew today was going off the rails, faster than usual. Thomas, listen to me, Danny said, his voice low and urgent. Whatever you're thinking, don't. Seriously. Just enjoy the view like a normal person for once. Thomas shot him a grin that practically screamed trouble. Danny boy, where's your sense of adventure? Look around. We're at a freaking palace. You think I'm going to pass up the chance to make history? His eyes sparkled with that dangerous mix of excitement and overconfidence. Danny pinched the bridge of his nose. You're about to make history, all right, as the first American tourist to get tackled by a SWAT team on foreign soil. But Thomas was already tuning him out. His gaze locked onto one of the guards, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose expression was carved out of stone. The guard didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. This, for some reason, fascinated Thomas to no end. I bet I could scream in his face and he wouldn't budge, Thomas mused, taking a step closer to the barrier separating the tourists from the guards. Danny grabbed his arm. Dude, no, I'm serious. This is not a good idea. But Thomas was already gone, mentally at least. He vaulted over the barrier with a grace that surprised even himself. A few tourists gasped, their cameras instinctively turning towards him. The murmur started almost immediately. Is he allowed to do that? Is this part of a performance? Oh my gosh, Harold, get a picture. Danny froze in place, torn between running after his friend and pretending he didn't know him. This is so bad. This is so bad, he whispered to himself. Meanwhile, Thomas strutted across the cobblestones like he owned the place. He stopped a few feet in front of the guard and raised the rifle. Well, toy rifle, but no one in the crowd could tell the difference. The reaction was instant and intense. Tourists screamed. A woman dropped her bag and bolted. Parents yanked their kids away, shielding their eyes. Phones were whipped out faster than you could say viral video. Danny's stomach dropped. Oh no, 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 no. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The guard, to his credit, didn't flinch. He just slowly turned his head, locking eyes with Thomas. It wasn't fear, it was something colder, more calculating. The kind of look that said, you have no idea what you just unleashed. Then it happened. A sharp, piercing whistle cut through the air like a blade. From the rooftops and hidden corners of the square, armed officers materialized as if summoned by some invisible force. They moved with military precision, fanning out to surround Thomas in seconds. Helmets, tactical gear, assault rifles. These guys weren't playing around. Whoa, okay, this escalated quickly, Thomas muttered under his breath, lowering the rifle. But the officers weren't interested in hearing him out. Get on the ground, now. The voice over the loudspeaker was loud enough to rattle his bones. Thomas blinked, trying to process the sudden shift in reality. Guys, chill, it's just a joke. He held up the toy rifle as if that would magically diffuse the situation. See? Fake. Totally fake. Yeah, that didn't help. The officers closed in, shouting commands in unison. Before Thomas could react, he was slammed to the ground, hard. His face hit the cold pavement with a sickening thud, knocking the wind out of him. His arms were yanked behind his back, and he felt the unforgiving bite of handcuffs snap around his wrists. "Oh, hey, okay, I get it. No need to break my arms," he groaned, trying to twist around to see who had pinned him down. But the officers weren't about to give him any breathing room. Danny stood frozen by the barrier, his face pale as a ghost. He watched in horror as his friend was dragged to his feet and marched away. Around him, the crowd buzzed with a mix of shock, fear, and morbid curiosity. "Did you see that? They tackled him like he was a terrorist. Is he going to prison?" "Serves him right. What kind of idiot points a gun at a royal guard?" Danny swallowed hard. "Man, you really did it this time," he muttered under his breath. He could already picture the headlines. American tourist causes international incident. Thomas, meanwhile, tried to shake off the dizziness from the impact. His vision swam, but he could still make out the sea of faces staring at him. Phones were everywhere, recording every humiliating second. He groaned loudly. "Great, just great. I'm going to be famous for all the wrong reasons," he muttered half to himself. As the officers hauled him away, he caught a glimpse of Danny, still rooted to the spot. "Danny, help me out, man. Tell them it's a joke." Nah, but Danny could only shake his head slowly, a look of pure dread on his face. He knew this wasn't something that could be talked away. This was the kind of trouble that didn't just disappear overnight. The cold, gray walls of the interrogation room seemed to suck the life out of the place. It was the kind of room designed to make people crack under pressure, silent, sterile, and suffocating. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting a flickering glow that felt more ominous with each passing second. Thomas Buckley sat in a metal chair bolted to the floor, the discomfort of the hard seat only adding to his growing sense of dread. Sweat trickled down his neck, chilling him despite the stifling air. His heart was pounding like a drumline in his chest. The adrenaline rush from earlier had long since worn off, leaving him trapped in a fog of anxiety and regret. The door finally opened with a slow, deliberate creak, and Thomas tensed. In walked a man who looked like he had seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. Detective Inspector Owens had the kind of presence that made people sit up straighter without realizing it. His black beard was neatly trimmed, his eyes sharp and cold like steel. The badge on his chest gleamed under the flickering light. He shut the door behind him with a resounding clunk, the sound echoing off the walls and making Thomas flinch slightly. Owens didn't say anything at first. He pulled out the chair across from Thomas and sat down with an air of calm authority, as if he had all the time in the world. He placed a thin file folder on the table between them and opened it, flipping through its contents slowly. Each turn of the page felt like a countdown to something Thomas wasn't ready to face. "So," Owens finally spoke, his voice low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to command attention. "Mr. Buckley, you've just violated multiple British laws concerning national security threats, and by some stroke of luck, no one shot you in the head today. Congratulations, that's not a common occurrence." Thomas blinked, momentarily stunned into silence. Did this guy seriously just say national security threats and shot in the head? His mind scrambled to catch up, but the words hit like a punch to the gut. This was way beyond anything he had expected. "Wait, what?" Thomas stammered, his voice cracking slightly. He leaned forward, shaking his head as if trying to clear out some mental fog. "Hold on a second, a national security threat? I don't think you understand. It was a joke, a toy. You guys couldn't tell it wasn't real? Come on, man. It was obviously fake." Owens didn't so much as blink. His expression remained as cold and unmovable as the guards outside the palace. He slowly closed the file, folding his hands on top of it as he leaned forward slightly. "Toy or not," Owens said, his tone dropping a degree colder, "you pointed what appeared to be a weapon at a member of the royal guard in front of the palace during peak tourist hours. Do you understand how that's classified as a threat to life?" Thomas felt his mouth go dry. His palms were sweaty, and he wiped them on his jeans under the table. He opened his mouth to protest again, but found himself at a loss for words. The weight of Owens's stare made it feel like the walls were closing in on him. "Look, Detective," Thomas began after a moment, his voice wavering slightly. "I didn't mean any harm. I'm just a tourist, okay? I didn't think it would be taken so seriously." He tried to chuckle, but it came out strained and hollow. "Isn't there some way we can clear this up? You know, without all the Legal stuff? Owens's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't move, didn't even blink, but the air in the room seemed to grow colder. Mr. Buckley, this isn't America, he said, each word carefully enunciated as if explaining a hard truth. Here, actions have consequences. And for stunts like yours, the consequence is potentially life imprisonment. Life imprisonment. The words echoed in Thomas's head like a bomb going off. His stomach dropped, and for a moment, he wasn't sure if he was still breathing. His vision blurred, and he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. Life, he whispered, barely able to get the word out. You're joking, right? Do I look like I'm joking? Owens replied, his voice sharp and unforgiving. He leaned back slightly, giving Thomas a moment to absorb the gravity of the situation. We take public safety very seriously here, Mr. Buckley. The fact that you didn't trigger a full-scale emergency response is nothing short of a miracle. If I were you, I'd start thinking about how to explain this to the court. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning out of control. He couldn't wrap his head around it. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. It was a prank, a stupid, harmless prank. How had it turned into this nightmare? Hours later, Thomas found himself sitting in a cold, dimly lit holding cell. The metallic clank of cell doors echoed through the sterile corridor outside. He stared at the floor, his mind replaying the events over and over like a broken record. The phrase, national security threat, kept looping in his head, refusing to let him rest. Outside the walls of the police station, the story had already exploded across the media. Every major news outlet had jumped on it like sharks scenting blood in the water. Headlines screamed, American tourist sparks security panic at Royal Palace. Toy gun incident raises questions about public safety. International relations or idiocy. Public reaction to palace stunt. And then there was social media. Oh, social media wasn't just eating this up. It was feasting. The video of Thomas aiming the toy gun at the guard had gone viral in a matter of hours. #ToyGunman was trending worldwide, and everyone had an opinion. Some people were outraged on his behalf. Seriously? A toy gun? Overreaction much? Free the guy. He didn't hurt anyone. But others weren't so kind. Maybe next time don't play stupid games if you don't want stupid prizes. Americans really think the whole world is their playground. The memes were savage. One had Thomas photoshopped into a medieval painting, holding a foam sword instead of a rifle. Another showed him in prison stripes with the caption, Epic prank, level 100 consequences. Thomas groaned loudly, running a hand through his hair as he tried to block out the mental image of his face plastered all over the internet. He could already hear the conversations waiting for him back home. His parents, his friends, his boss. Everyone would have seen it by now. Perfect. Just perfect, he muttered under his breath. He slumped against the wall of the cell, wondering how in the world he was going to get out of this mess. Courtrooms, it turns out, are a lot less dramatic than what you see in movies. There were no gasps of shock, no last-minute revelations, just cold, clinical efficiency. The walls were beige, the wood benches polished but uncomfortable, and the air smelled faintly of old paper and stress. Thomas Buckley sat at the defendant's table, his hands nervously fidgeting with the edge of his jacket. He couldn't shake the feeling that all eyes were on him, which, of course, they were. A row of cameras lined the back of the courtroom, reporters scribbling furiously in their notepads. He recognized a few faces from news segments he'd seen earlier. Great, he thought. I'm front-page material now. Across from him sat the prosecution, a prim woman in a perfectly tailored suit, with an expression that screamed, I'm here to make an example out of you. She didn't need to argue much. The evidence was damning. Surveillance footage showed every detail of the incident. The moment Thomas vaulted over the barrier, the toy rifle in his hands, and the guard's icy stare. Add in a few dozen eyewitness accounts, and Thomas didn't stand a chance. The judge, a stern, elderly man with thinning gray hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose, cleared his throat. The room fell silent. His presence commanded respect, and even the reporters put down their pens to listen. To Mr. Buckley, the judge began, his voice deep and authoritative. You stand accused of causing a significant public disturbance, imposing a perceived threat to national security. Let me be clear. In today's world, Where acts of violence and terrorism have become an ever-present concern, such behavior cannot be tolerated. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to jump up and scream. It wasn't real, it was a joke. But he knew that wouldn't help. Instead, he sat frozen, his mind racing. Whether the weapon was real or not is irrelevant, the judge continued. What matters is the fear and chaos your actions caused. You frightened families, disrupted public order, and risked provoking a potentially deadly response. It is by sheer fortune that no one was harmed. Thomas's lawyer, a middle-aged man who seemed perpetually tired, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. They both knew there was no arguing with the facts. Thomas felt like the walls were closing in on him as the judge continued his lecture, each word hitting like a hammer. In light of these circumstances, the judge said, his voice firm and unrelenting, this court has no choice but to sentence you to life imprisonment. Life imprisonment. The words echoed through the courtroom, sending a collective gasp through the crowd. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Thomas's ears rang, as if someone had flipped a switch, muting the world around him. He stared at the judge, unable to process what he had just heard. The room erupted into murmurs. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, while others, mainly those seated near the prosecution, nodded in approval. A few even clapped, their applause sharp and unsettling in the otherwise somber atmosphere. Thomas barely noticed any of it. He sat in stunned silence, his mind blank except for one thought. This can't be real. They can't actually do this. It was a toy, just a toy. The walk back to his holding cell felt like a dream, or more like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The guards flanked him on either side, their boots echoing off the tiled floors. Thomas kept his head down, unable to meet the stares of onlookers as he was led out of the courtroom. Reporters shouted questions at him, their voices blending into an unintelligible roar. Cameras flashed, momentarily blinding him. Mr. Buckley, do you have any comments on the verdict? Thomas, what do you think of the public's reaction to your case? Do you regret your actions? Regret. That word gnawed at the edges of his mind. He hadn't thought much about regret when he was pulling off his so-called epic prank. Now, it was all he could think about. Once inside the cell, Thomas sat on the narrow bench and stared up at the ceiling. The walls were the same dull gray as the interrogation room, and the air was heavy with the scent of disinfectant and despair. The sound of a heavy metal door slamming shut echoed down the corridor, reverberating through the cell like a final punctuation mark on his fate. He sat there for what felt like hours, his mind replaying the events over and over. The jump over the barrier, the look on the guard's face, the panic in the crowd, the cold handcuffs biting into his wrists. Every moment etched itself into his memory like a scar. Finally, he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the cell. Why? It was just a toy, just a stupid toy. But there was no answer, no justification that made sense anymore, just the relentless ticking of time and the quiet hum of the prison around him. Outside, the world moved on. The news cycle churned out updates. Social media buzzed with debates, and the hashtag #toygunman continued to trend. But for Thomas, time stood still. All that remained were 4 gray walls, the weight of his choices, and the endless question that haunted him. How did it come to this? What would you have done in Thomas's place? Do you think the sentence was fair or too harsh? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever faced a situation that spiraled out of control because of a misunderstanding? Let's talk about it. Leave a comment, like the post, and share your experiences. This story was created to shed light on serious issues, like cultural misunderstandings and the consequences of thoughtless actions. Our goal is to raise awareness and spark conversations that can help make the world a better, more understanding place.